This week on the Regenerating Nature podcast, we talk a little bit about Valentine's Day, of course, because 'tis the season. We also get into some key line designs and woody polycultures. Get into a little bit more depths on tree planting and shrub planting and protecting your investment along those lines. Taylor goes into a little bit of depth on purchasing land as far as the financial side of things. And you're going to want to listen to the whole thing because we've got a really important hot tip for you at the end. So thanks for tuning in. If you're watching this, you'll probably notice the video quality is a little bit different. I had some camera issues, had to switch over to my webcam versus the higher quality camera. But the audio should be good. So those of you listening, you're probably not going to notice anything different. Anyway, thanks for tuning in and enjoy. Welcome to the Regenerating Nature podcast. In this podcast, we cover all things nature and land and how we as human beings are a direct product of nature and directly tied to the land. My name is Thomas Milsna. I am the owner of the Untamed Ambition, a habitat consulting and development company. And I am joined by my co-host, Taylor Henry, a regenerative farmer and realtor. Taylor, how's it going today?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've actually had a pretty exciting, I feel like most of my days are exciting to me anyway, but the last 24 hours have been very positive and uplifting. It's Valentine's Day. For those of you listening or watching, you're watching this a couple days post Valentine's Day. But my Valentine's Day started out fairly well. Went and got a couples massage, deep tissue. I'm actually still kind of a little bit lotiony, kind of greasy from that situation, but had brunch. To clarify, I did these things with my wife, my better half. But this is actually following up from probably the most important on-site consultation I've ever done in my entire life yesterday, which we'll get into. We'll get into that a little bit more to follow this, but how's your Valentine's Day going? Did you order a bunch of chocolates? You had a bunch of roses or something?
No, I failed on that front, but I took kid duty this morning right away, so she was able to sleep in a long time, and then we are cooking some homegrown, home-raised ribeyes tonight for dinner. So
ooh, that's tasty.
They will be. Yeah,
that's
I'm
a good
looking
meal.
forward to it.
Yeah.
Oh, our ribeyes. Oh, they're just it's all I've been thinking about all day.
I
One
thought
and a half
maybe
minutes on each side, 90 seconds on each side. Oh, and Valentine's Day, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And make sure you start those at room temperature before you cook them.
Yes. They're
That's
sitting on the counter right now.
probably the most common mistake in cooking meat is trying to cook it when it's cold or partially frozen, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate if you're like thawing and you didn't have time to get to room temperature, but if you have the forethought and the ability to get it to room temperature, that makes a giant difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you can perfect your steak cooking abilities when you start with that baseline of room temperature. It's a huge advantage there. So
do you
I
ever sous
think,
vide?
oh yeah, sous vide is awesome. Yeah. I was thinking about maybe thawing out a deer heart to cook for dinner, but my wife's not, she's not really into that as much. I mean, I generally will just slice them up in slivers and cook them for taco meat or something, and she doesn't know the difference. Most people don't know the difference between steak and heart by any means, but since it's a special occasion, it just makes sense. But I don't know, we'll probably just have tacos because it's Tuesday. Taco Tuesday is a popular event in our house.
Yeah. I got really deep into sous vide, and then I kind of moved away from it when we started cooking this meat. Just because I actually think that there's a better taste and you get a better representation of the meat by not sous vide it. But for people starting with steaks, sous vide is a great place to start.
Yeah, I've done a handful of sous vide. Actually, I never bought like a special sous vide machine or anything. Actually, for anyone out there that wants to try it, a cheap little hack. I bought this like $30 temperature probe outlet rig. I think it's kind of designed for like aquariums. If you run a heater in an aquarium where you drop this temp probe in the water and then you plug the heater into that. And you can also plug a fan or whatever into it to heat or cool and modify or regulate that temperature. But it works out well because you just plug we'll call it a dumb crock pot, one that just has, the off, low, or high setting. You just put it on high, plug that crock pot into that regulator, drop the temp probe in, set your temp for 130 degrees or whatever, and go to town. And it's a lot cheaper than having sous vide machine, and it works just as well. But no, I felt that with a lot of the meats that I cooked in there, I think I actually overcooked them a little bit in the sous vide. Like they were almost too tender, where they get kind of almost like mealy in your mouth. It doesn't have
Mushy,
that's
mushy.
correct. Yep.
Yes.
So for anyone doing it, it's very appealing. Like, oh, I can set this thing. I can cook this steak for 4 hours, but don't overdo it. I mean, you
Don't do
definitely
it.
don't need
No,
to overdo it.
do not do it. Because I've done it because it's a convenience thing, right? Like if you're not there to take it out, it's like, oh, whatever. It's just sitting in the same temperature for another hour or so. No, steaks, I don't do any longer than 1 hour.
Yeah, that's good advice.
And it is because of that. Like one day it wouldn't, but it makes a big difference. I saw someone actually on TikTok claim they did it in a dishwasher. So there's a real cheap option.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of it. I just, there's some weird thing that I have where cooking a hunk of meat in a plastic bag kind of turns me
Yes.
off a little bit. So that's where I draw the line. That's why
Yes.
I don't overdo it. Even though I usually use like a food saver type bag that's supposed to be safe with that, but it's kind of weirds me out. And I'm sure that at the end of the day, it's going to be better to not cook it in plastic in general. So that's where
Yeah,
my
I think
head's
it's
at with it.
better to learn how to cook it well without it. But if you are a novice or just starting with steaks or have a big group of people coming over, it is an awesome hack.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What else is new with you? How's the weather treating you this week? Because now it's getting a little bit muddy. It's raining right now.
Yes. Yeah, we made an executive decision this morning. I unrolled a couple bales of hay, and after this podcast, I am going to go lock them in a pen. So hopefully I put a bale in the pen for them to kind of meander the way back in there. And then I just unrolled all the bales that we have in the field right now. So if they are eating out in the field, they would be eating on unrolled hay, and then the whole like walk up area into the pen is lined with hay. Hay is the farmer's best friend to combat mud.
Yeah.
And we are definitely to the tipping point now. Like today's rain will probably push it over the top to where it's truly muddy. Still, as of yesterday, you're still just getting down in that first like inch where there's pugging. There's no deep actual deep penetration into the soil, but today that would probably happen, and tonight because it's supposed to rain all night. But then we're gonna freeze up again tomorrow, and we'll be
Sure.
fine.
Hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully it stays frozen for a little while. Yeah, that's good. I mean, we're definitely gonna lose all the snow cover, but no, it should be good for sure. Have you been paying attention to the news at all with these train derailments?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on those? Now that there's three of them that have happened in the last week or so or whatever it's been.
Well, there seems to be a lot of strange things happening.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was talking to my wife about this morning because unfortunately, they're not really talking about it too much on the news. And it sounds terrible. Like the reports coming in from people that are surfacing online, people are talking about their outdoor pets dying from the air quality. And obviously, if your cat that lives outside around your house and in your buildings is dead, then all of the wildlife in the vicinity is likely going to die or have some exposure to those
Ohio, right?
chemicals. Yeah, East
Yeah.
Palestine, Ohio, I believe. And then
Yeah.
I
Dead
forget where the
dogs
other
and dead fish downstream.
dead chickens, backyard chicken flocks are dying. They're going through great lengths to get rid of
Dude, they're
backyard
coming.
chickens.
They are coming after chickens right now.
Yeah.
They're like, I am so sick and tired of people raising chickens on their own. We need to make all that money ourselves.
Yeah. And we're willing to sacrifice the native ecosystems. They're all going down. Yeah, that's scary because that's going to eventually hit the Gulf of Mexico. And not to go into too much detail on it without all the facts, but the scariest part of this, it kind of follows suit with all these other issues going on in our country where you have these big corporations running the show, causing the problems, but also doing the research and fixing, and I'm throwing up air quotes to anyone just listening, fixing the problems, right? And that's the scary part with this instance where the actual railway company is the one in charge of the cleanup and essentially the fallout of it, and they're trying to downplay the situation a lot. And I don't know, I hope they get ahead of it. I don't know much for details on those other two derailments, but I know that there was more toxic chemicals, and they're not looking good either.
No, I mean, and well, the UFO things are getting a little bit out of hand too.
Yeah.
This morning, new report. Oh, unfortunately, we will not be able to find any of the shot down material. Like, what?
Yeah.
Are we
Is that what they
talking about
said?
the same military operation that is capable of pretty much anything?
Yeah, they can find a potential terrorist living in a cave on the other side of the world, but they can't find a large object that dropped on our
That
own
you shot down.
that you shot down. You couldn't track it all the way, right?
Tell me you didn't track it after you shot it? Like, I
Well, I
these
see
are
that
some odd ones.
I
That
see
thing came
they
over. One of them came over Wisconsin.
yeah, is that the one they shot down in like one of the Great
Yeah,
Lakes?
on frozen lake, and they can't find it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're full of shit. I mean, I don't know what's going on with that. Is it more of these spy balloon situations? Is it, it's an unidentified flying object, one way, shape, or form? But if the White House releases information saying that it has nothing to do with terrestrials,
Terrestrial.
wow, I just felt chewed on my tongue there. Then I would probably safely bet that it does.
No, they said that we don't. There's no indication that it is, but we have no proof that it wasn't. Pretty much is
Yeah,
what they said.
yeah. So that's in a roundabout way saying that
Well, honestly, I'd
everything
prefer
else.
that because guess what? The other option is, I think we might be going into war with like China or something. So
Well,
let's hope that it's a alien thing.
I mean, let's be realistic at this point. It's a lot more likely that we are going to war with someone, whether it's China or Russia or whoever else we've pissed off in the last couple of years.
I would prefer aliens because I mean, most likely they've been around, and if they wanted to kill us all, they would have already done it. And
And you're entertaining the idea of getting probed. It's Valentine's Day.
I I don't know. Honestly, a lot of it I just try to ignore because it's just nothing that. But these last couple days, I have noticed it.
No, it's hard to ignore it, honestly. And really, a lot of these problems are because too many good people ignore this shit for too long. Unfortunately, like I don't want this to be part of my life. I want to focus on what I'm doing, focus on my family and the things immediately around me. But there's too many people that are just getting away with things that are affecting us all in the long run, like these environmental issues. Man, anyone who lives anywhere near that spill site, that train wreck, and all the way downstream is going to be affected for a long time. And yeah, and who knows what's going on with these UFO situations? What are they spying on? Or I don't know. I mean, if they are aliens,
I like being located in Wisconsin. We're not downstream of anything really. I think the biggest concern is, you have a major, I guess, port in the northern part where, people can enter the country through Wisconsin. You are 5 hours away from Chicago, but I would take my chances here. I'd probably prefer to be in like Wyoming, or North Dakota, but
yeah, but that's getting pretty close to a volcano, though. Isn't there a fault line out there too? I mean, I feel like we are pretty safe here in the Midwest across the board.
yeah, yeah, and you're super safe from natural disasters,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
extremely safe from it.
yeah. We don't get a ton of tornadoes. We don't have to deal with any hurricanes, earthquakes, stuff like that. But all that
And
being
as a
said,
trade, as a trade to not deal with those things, you still aren't dealing with that bad of, because you think about like North Dakota, South Dakota, they don't really deal with tornadoes that much either, but they have way harsher winters than us and
Yeah.
way worse weather conditions than us.
Yeah, it's brutal
Yeah,
out there.
Wisconsin's awesome.
Yeah. But that being said, no one wants to move here. Don't move here. You don't want to live here.
Yes,
No.
well, if you're listening to this, you can move here.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you're looking to buy land, get a hold of Taylor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I mean, we've got some feedback from a couple listeners. Taylor, do you want to read one of those comments we got, just so anyone
Yes.
listening, we are reaching some people, which is good.
Yeah, we appreciate you commenting and letting us know how we're doing. YouTuber at Camp T91. This is probably my new favorite podcast. I've been thinking about almost everything you guys are talking about. Rarely do I listen to something that covers so many things I'm interested in. I'm homesteading property in Idaho, and I'm really focused on managing it for wild game, but also big into permaculture and holistic grazing. And I'm planning on using sheep, chickens, and waterfowl to rotate through food plots to establish and maintain them, as well as manage other wildlife habitat. You guys are so up my alley. It's scary, LOL. Really cool to hear others talking about the same things I've been thinking about for so long. I'm really enjoying your content. Keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Camp T91. We appreciate that comment for sure.
That's awesome, man.
And
Sheep, chickens, and waterfowl.
yeah,
Sheep being the ruminant in that model, which sheep is, if I wasn't grazing cattle, sheep would be my second choice probably. And chickens and waterfowl, it's pretty cool.
yeah, no, that's awesome. I love it. I mean, well, they said it in the comment. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about, exactly what we're trying to promote, just incorporating the hunting aspect and the wildlife aspect with livestock and agriculture, so we can, maximize land use without exploiting those natural resources at the end of the day. That's nature was created, or, nature created these systems, these management systems on its own. And we've shied away from that so much in the last couple hundred years that this is how we get back to a healthy system, is implementing these animals into our everyday systems and utilizing them instead of getting in bed with all these chemical companies and relying on synthetics and mechanization to do everything for us. It's just not going to end well. I mean, these train derailments that we just talked about, I mean, they're transporting hazardous chemicals. If there wasn't a demand for these hazardous chemicals, and I don't know exactly, I saw a list of them. I don't know exactly what they're used for or whatnot, but again, it's like the more demand we create for these types of chemicals that are, poisons to us in the environment, the more of this stuff that's going to continue to happen. And when these giant companies are in control of transporting them and also the damage control, and they have problems, it's not going to end well for any of us. And on top of that, I mean, the root problem is that our established politicians are in bed with these big companies, so no one's going to be held accountable for this. And that's the normal people, the people that actually make up the backbone of this country, are the ones that pay for it over and over again. So we appreciate.
I feel very confident that owning land and producing food on it is going to pay off.
Oh, absolutely.
Over the next 30 years.
Absolutely. So this listener, watcher, I guess, watched the YouTube video, or maybe they just listened to it in the background. But they're from Idaho. I had someone reach out to me. I'm trying to remember now. I think they were down in Georgia doing a very similar thing. Very, very similar situation, kind of homesteading, but wanting to improve the property for wildlife, incorporating animals, planting mass bearing trees and stuff like that. And this is, I love it. I absolutely love it. I just want to keep growing this thing and building this support network, right? We started doing this because there's a lot that we want to learn. We only know what we know, and we are hoping to bring value to the audience because we've dealt with a lot of people. Taylor, you've dealt with some of the biggest names in this movement, Gabe Brown and Mark Shepard and a lot of these guys. And, I'm kind of doing the same. I've been following all these things for years now and incorporating them and working with other companies and trying to promote this stuff as much as possible. So it's good. We're starting to see more people become aware of this. So at the end of the day, that's again, really our ultimate goal is just to bring that awareness and generate some interest. I I always kind of, especially for me, because my business revolves around this stuff. So in one way, shape, or form, I have to try and figure out what gets people interested in this. So we have this person that commented, they're obviously involved in this and they understand it. And for the most part, everyone that I know that starts to invest a little bit of time into researching these things, they get interested in it very quickly because it does all make sense. But my question for you, Taylor, because you have a little bit of a marketing background as well, is like, how do we generate more interest in this? Or even the listener out there, throw a comment on the YouTube channel or on the listening platform that you're using. And if you have any ideas, how do we spread the word? Not specifically to promote our podcast by any means, but how do we get more people involved in this mindset of being connected with your food, but not just, you being connected with your food? Because to be completely honest with you, I have nothing against it, but I think homesteading, like just purely homesteading, is somewhat of a selfish act. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I know that kind of sounds negative, but homesteading's great. You're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your family, you're living a sustainable life, which I love that. But how do we create that ripple effect from that homesteading mindset outward to get more people involved and more people connected with their food? Some bigger homesteads, and even like we do here, we sell our excess to the neighbors, and in that way they're more involved. But how do we get more people on board with this? Ultimately, we talked about this last week. How do we get more people involved in the farming mindset? Because we need more farmers. We need more farmers on smaller farms versus less farmers on bigger farms, because that's the way we really can take care of these systems and manage them to the potential that they have without exploiting the resources.
Well, I think first, we need exposure. We need people, with these kind of ideas that are buried deep within them. Maybe they've heard a thing or two about it, but they haven't never acted on it, or actually, because there is mainstream people talking about regenerative agriculture. I mean, Joe Rogan's the biggest podcast in the world. He actively has people on there that are in the world. He's had Joel Salatin on it. So there is no shortage of people not knowing about it. But maybe people haven't gone deeper into understanding the whole idea about it. And I think that's the biggest thing that I find. Even people that are buying our meat, so they're willing to spend the extra money on it, but they haven't been educated enough about the whole system and why it makes sense. And then, the people who are doing it, right, they need to be more vocal and more active. And I definitely understand the attraction to just being a homesteader and disappearing, because it is awesome. You get to essentially take care of a lot of the necessities that you have in life, and you don't really need the outside world to operate. But if you do have the urge to share that and to educate people, I think it's important that people speak up. I live by the model of life in thirds. 1/3 of my life has to be taking care of financial freedom, financial well-being. The other third is me taking care of my family, making sure that my family's taken care of, and that means food, shelter, water. And then the other third is my responsibility to the community. I think everybody has some responsibility to the community, and all of those things are fighting what you believe in and fighting, for greater good. A lot of that third in the community falls into that. So it's also our job not to get caught up with, people who have followings, maybe not telling the whole truth, having morals, being honest. When something doesn't work, be honest about that. And then always being open to people who have questions and that ask for help.
It's all good information. Bring up some good points there too. That sense of community. I feel like we've talked about that before on here, and we'll probably talk about that frequently. But obviously, a podcast like this, or any of these other people that people are following in this movement, there's a sense of community in that, in and of itself. But it's very important to be involved in your immediate local community as well, right? Because there's a lot of the issue with the internet, and it's a great place. You can find a lot of good information, a lot of bad information, a lot of positive stuff, a lot of negative stuff. but that's the hard part is it's hard to decipher through all those things. And it's also hard to know like what's real and what's not a lot of times, who's actually genuine, who's actually doing these things. And we know, with, especially now with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, we know how much fake stuff is out there, and how much of it is propaganda across the board. So stay involved in those communities for sure, the online communities for sure, because it's a great support system. Like this, like we can network here in one way, shape, or form with someone in Idaho or someone in Georgia, and share information and get feedback, and just, again, work to spread the word. But at the same time, like, you're missing a giant opportunity with your local community, and that's where you're the most influential, bar none. Like, you can go out and you show these people what you're doing, you show them the healthy lifestyle you're living and how happy your family is. And I see this a lot in our little bubble lately, the last couple of years. It's like all the anxiety and fear that came with COVID and all the lockdowns and all the stuff going on. And here we are, 5 minutes from downtown, and we're living our best life. I mean, not much really changed for us. And honestly, there was, I do enjoy going out, but for a while there, I was like, man, this is a great excuse to not have to worry about those things. It's just, we're here, we're comfortable, we've got food, we've got our own system that's pretty self-sustainable. It's not perfect by any means, and we're working on improving it all the time. But like you said, I mean, it's that peace of mind where your family's taken care of, right? At the end of the day, they're taken care of. And for me, a lot of this came about because I was just dead set on providing the healthiest food I possibly could for my family and my kids. And you can't trust a lot of these companies. I mean, more and more research is coming out, more and more testing is being done with a lot of these products having all these chemicals. And again, the root cause here, or one of the big players at fault is the government, where the regulations they have on some of these chemicals are just ridiculous. It's the what do they call it, acceptable levels, right? It's acceptable levels of chemicals in your food. Well, when you're getting X amount of acceptable chemicals from everything that you're consuming and everything that you're wearing, all these synthetic odors and stuff in your house and all these things, I mean, it all adds up real fast. So it's great to be self-sustainable, but it's great to be aware of those things at the same time. And if you're not aware of them, I mean, I guess ignorance is bliss, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I was not aware of this stuff before. My first business venture or idea that I wrote down on a piece of paper before, when I was buying this farm, was a turf farm, so a sod farm. Because you look through, like, where are all these people getting sod from? You want sod from the general geographical area where you're putting it down. I'm like, oh, there's no sod farms. Well, then you look into all the chemicals and everything that it takes. I mean, it literally works against every single rule in the soil health playbook. But that's how I got it. Like, that's how I was then thrown into this. And I think a lot of people got into it from COVID, because rule number one from the beginning of COVID was being healthy is the best chance to fighting this off with vitamin D. Eating better, eating healthy. I think a lot of people, where you can raise your hand, you probably know someone within your circle of your 5 closest people in your life that have a gluten allergy. I think that's the biggest thing people that can personally relate to what we are talking about. And those gluten allergies, are directly because of generational, each generation that's been kind of having access to herbicide. But we won't get too much into that. That's more of a topic if you ever are interested in looking at Zach Bush's stuff. He covers that really well. But
yeah, no, you're right. You're spot on. I mean, that's exactly it. You look around, for sure, someone has some sort of gluten allergy or intolerance. For sure, someone has some sort of autoimmune issue. For sure, someone is trying to have kids and has fertility issues. For sure, someone has cancer, had cancer, died of cancer. I mean, all of these things, everything is related to our food. If you have a mechanical issue with your body, a problem with a muscle, pulled muscle, sore muscle, broken bone, whatever it might be, that's one thing. That's a physical issue. But for the most part, if you feel like crap and you're having rashes or some sort of adverse reactions, most of the time it's directly related to the food that you're eating or have consumed for a large portion of your life. Or like you said, it's a generational thing where these things are just piling up generation after generation. So yeah,
My
this whole
biggest
movement.
my biggest like aha too was having a kid. Um, so I was a twin, and I compare, and this is no bashing on my parents. Like I love my parents. I appreciate what they did. If they're listening to this, they're probably gonna take offense to it, but I compare my kids' first 10 months to my first 10 months. Um, and it's pretty simple. Limited shots for mine, if I don't think any. Um, obviously everything that was recommended was taken for me. Continued breastfeeding, like we haven't stopped. We got it for 2 weeks because of being twins, and it was recommended. Something happened. I was colicky, and I was given corn syrup by a doctor's idea to stop me from crying. My kid's never received any type of medication. He has not been sick one time. Nothing. Literally, knock on wood, he's been a super, super healthy baby. I was having seizures, and I think I was in the ER like 3 or 4 times in the first like 8 months of my life. But I wonder why.
Yeah.
Like those little things right there, and then one of the, and this is another, like I don't want to get too personal either, but my wife took an antibiotic. So Woods has never gotten anything put through him, right? She took an antibiotic. It was the first thing she had ever taken that was like not a healthy food or something that we were really intentional of putting in her body, because I don't remember what she had. She had something. He broke out in a rash in less than like 12 hours.
Yeah.
Took him off the breast milk, gave him frozen breast milk from before she was on the antibiotic. It cleared up.
Yeah, that's insane. No, that's 100% evident, right? Of how what you put in your body
Well, and
comes
like
out
I've
somewhere.
been certain, like, because people will say like you're just getting lucky, you gotten lucky. Like that's fine. I'll take that. There's probably a percentage of luck, and there's also a percentage of truth.
Does he go to daycare?
No, that's another big thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, once those kids start going to daycare, then they become little petri dishes for
Yeah.
viruses. But that's part of it too. I mean, you have to build up that immunity over time, and being sick is kind of a common thing when you're a kid, but it's like what level of sickness? We've got two
But I think
kids.
he's fought off stuff really well too. Like I was coming home after going, being exposed to a whole high school football team for 4 months. And like you
Yeah.
could tell he was getting maybe sniffles or something, he'd fight it off. But like there's been Kenzie nor I, nor our kid have been sick for over 14 months. I got
Yeah.
COVID
Well,
last January. So none of us have been sick. But it's just, but we also ramped up. Like I got COVID, I got slammed by it last winter. And then I was like, well, if you're going to talk the talk, then you better start walking the walk. And we have completely changed everything since then with our diet. And plus we finally have gotten our full, like we were consuming everything from the farm. And at that time we had not yet.
yeah. No, it obviously exposure is going to play a role in that. But again, even getting sick and the duration of your sickness and the severity of that sickness are going to be directly related to how healthy you are going into that, right? It's like we have two kids, one kid's in kindergarten, one kid goes to daycare, and I'm dealing with people face to face all the time too. Do I still get sick? Yes, but it's completely different in the last 4 or 5 years once we started taking this stuff a lot more serious, where it's like, oh, I've got kind of a sinus thing for a couple days, and I just have to make sure that I'm getting high quality sleep and pounding the fluids, and then it's gone. It's the same with our kids.
Yep.
Like, oh, runny nose, okay, we're good. Maybe they have a little bit of a fever one night, but those fevers are completely natural, so we're not getting upset about anything or too concerned. And then the next day they're pretty much over it. So it's like usually a 24 to 36 hour cycle of these sicknesses versus weeks and weeks. And we've never, I think, out of both kids, knock on wood, both kids, we've only had to take one kid to the hospital one time, and it was for some, like, I don't even remember what they call it, some sort of viral thing where they get like sores in their throat, and he's like a 1.5-year-old baby just screaming bloody murder, and he had never really been a kid that really cried. He was very easy going the whole time. And it's just like, and we were first time parents. It'd be probably a different story if our second kid got it. Like, yeah, it'll be fine. Rub some dirt on it, right?
Give some ivermectin.
Yeah, yeah.
Seriously, I mean, ivermectin cured lice on my cattle, so that was awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just an awesome drug.
No, it is. I mean, it's a, what is it, anti-parasitic or something? It's
Mm-hmm.
good for a lot of things. But no, I mean, that kind of brings me around to where I was yesterday, talking about your childhood and how things change over time. But I've so I'm a habitat consultant by trade. I've got a biology background. I've worked in this field for a while now, and the toughest client that I've ever had is my father, where he owns and operates a large farm, and the habitat, if left unmanaged on any property, is going to decline without any management. So for years I've been working on him to implement a management plan, and I finally yesterday got him to walk the woods with me, and it was a very good day. I mean, by the end of the day, he was on board for a full management plan and adding value. One of the big things that I was trying to get him to understand, or with what I do professionally, is I'm trying to bring as much value to that wildlife habitat as possible, get it to produce in one way, shape, or form. So, you're either talking about very rich recreational opportunities that people essentially are willing to pay for if you're leasing a property, or, just having people that value it enough to pay for the management of the property. But along those lines, and being part of a farm, trying to find other ways to create income, diversified income on that property. And, I talked to him about all these orchard edges and planting or building back edge habitat on the farm and using mass producing trees, and the potential income opportunities for those down the road. And it was just a really good afternoon. He was very receptive to everything. And he's the hardest person in my life to talk to. Never really had a great father son relationship growing up on a farm, a very busy farm. It always was more of like an employee employer type relationship. But he's one of the most educated and intelligent human beings that I know. He's a doctor of vet medicine. He ran his own vet practice for a long time before he decided to make the switch to be a full-time farmer instead of a part-time vet and a part-time farmer. And for him to come around and start understanding these things, I was like, okay, this is good. This is really good. We're starting to make some progress here, shifting away from, this pure utilitarian mindset of, exploiting the land as much as possible. But he's also a dairy farmer, which, the things they're doing obviously aren't perfect, but compared to cash cropping in general, where there's no nutrient management plan, there's no animal integration. Dairy farmers for the most part are integrating animals in one way, shape, or form. They're not actually out on the fields very often. Some of them are,
But god damn, they could be, and it would work out well.
Well, so there's one thing that he said, and I'm trying to make small gains here, but there was one thing that he mentioned where I told him straight up, because we actually got in the conversation about utilizing cattle to manage the recreational sides of the farm. Because right now, the way our farm lays out, there's I don't even know what the total acreage is at this point, because they've been basically buying up every farm they could in the area. Because in our area, if you're familiar with Amish at all, and I'm not trying to speak negatively of them, but certain areas throughout the country, there's larger communities of Amish, and we talked about community, right? They build those communities. They have their own, spiritual or religious,
like geographical, like hubs of communities.
yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a phone call coming in there. But yeah, so they have their own, like regional religion.
Well, they have bishops, if you're saying that.
Yes,
like
that's
they have
what
bishops, like the people that run their communities. Yeah.
Correct. So they have like a bishop that runs it and kind of, dictates what they can or cannot do in these local communities. And the downside of that for anyone who's in that community thinking about potentially ever buying land is once that land is bought up by the Amish community, it really rarely ever leaves the Amish community. They sell it to one another amongst that community, and they change. It does change hands quite a bit. But anyway, the farm it's grown quite a bit over the years, and I think right now they're up to, I don't know, 12 or 1300 acres, and of that, it's probably 400-ish acres of non-tillable land. And of the non-tillable land, the 400 acres is wooded pasture land. But I think probably 50% of that is actually pastured, maybe a little bit more is actually pastured with cattle throughout certain times of the year. So what I was talking to my father about was utilizing the cattle into our management regiment, first going in and doing timber stand improvement or forest stand improvement and keeping all the invasives in check, and then rotating with our management cycles, rotating through fire as a disturbance and cattle as a disturbance. And the way the conversation, or we went with that conversation, he basically said, we can't do this here, we can't do this there, we don't have enough cattle for that, or we have too many for this, or whatever the topic was that we were talking about. And basically what I told him is, what we need to do is we need to look at the land and start with what the land can handle and then dial back from there. Right. It's like, let's not try to push the capacity of the land. Let's let the land tell us what it can actually handle and come back from there. And that kind of segued into him basically saying, yeah, at some point we probably are going to have to do things a little bit different on the farm and actually maybe cut down the herd size on the dairy cattle. And I was like, yeah, that's I'm glad you're thinking about that. It's like, there's a lot of things that come into play. I mean, we talked about the carbon credits and stuff that the government's offering farmers, which are a total joke, absolute total joke. He's on all sorts of different boards of directors for organizations and stuff that are working with dairy farmers across the state and across the country. But he said that, like, just to be enrolled in any of those carbon credits for having wooded properties, you have to own a minimum of 5,000 acres, which is a joke. So that just basically means like these giant timber companies are the only ones eligible for those credits, which, again, they're the ones that are paying for the campaigns of these politicians at the end of the day. So that's a problem. But overall, it was a great day, a lot of good conversations, and I can now invest time into putting together a full-on management plan for this property, which is going to be pretty extensive because, again, we're talking about a pretty large property across the board. But it was good. It was
God, I have so many ideas for a dairy farm.
Oh, I know. Me too. Tell me some of your ideas for a dairy farm. Let's talk.
Okay, here's how I break it down. Usually these farms are set up, the positives of them is that they have really good infrastructure. So that's taken care of. And they usually have really thought out like alleyways that they're just not using. So whatever ag fields are within an easy alleyway, you can whatever fields are within an easy alleyway to the milking operation. You run a rotational grazing operation through that. Dry cows and whatever cows don't need to be milked every day are then grazing on the land that, I'm assuming what he does for the 400 acres. Those fields where those animals are grazing that are being milked, you could easily still have a rotation. If you were still hell bent on the fact that you wanted to grow corn to supplement feed them, those corn fields then should be the same fields that they are winter grazing and bale grazing. And then you just, you strip graze and rotationally graze all of your ag fields, and then winter graze the places that you're rotating in the annual crops. And you have an awesome system. Plus the alleyways are then planted with woody crops.
Yeah. The polycultures. No, that's exactly what I've thought of too. The question or the obstacle there, I guess, is,
oh, and then I would reduce I'd probably sell the whole herd and rebuild the herd and have smaller frames. Because I think a lot of the big issues with the pasturing is they'll be like, well, they're like 1,600 pounds. They're not, and that's right. That is too heavy. So you just need to reduce that size over time.
Yeah, Holsteins probably aren't the best breed for that setup, or
but you can get smaller frame. You can breed for smaller frames.
Yeah, and also you'd have to cut down the herd size because it's probably not realistic to figure out how to rotationally graze 1,000 animals in the area that we live.
But
I mean,
what if,
we're in
but
hill
what if,
country, right?
what if you did it only, what if they started, we only did it for 25% of the days? The
Yeah.
days that we know that pasture is really set and you have the paddocks in place and you know exactly how much they're going to consume in a day.
Oh,
And
you're
then
right.
you slowly over time, you just pull, because most likely what's going to happen is you're going to cut down on the biggest issue, which is time, which every dairy farmer, is going through and cleaning all the stalls. I mean, it's like 50% of the time is cleaning and moving manure.
Yeah.
So taking that manure and putting it on the ground and letting them do the work for you is kind of the main idea there. Not to mention, ideally, you're getting a healthier animal that should produce milk at a lower input cost.
Well, I mean, we're moving in that direction
Yeah.
slowly but surely, because he loosely agreed to let me take over all the pasture management, at least put together
Ooh.
the pasture management plan. So now we are talking about mostly young stock heifers, some dry cows, but he also for years has been talking about adding a beef herd to the operation to diversify income. And we artificially breed our young stock to right now, actually, they're breeding them to Wagyu, smaller frame
Oh yeah.
animals, and because they're a little bit easier for them to calve first round. So they get all these like Wagyu hybrids that are basically Wagyu, and they're finishing. What did you tell me? I forget now what it was, 22 months or something, or 18 months, and they're finishing out hanging weight at like 1,100 pounds, which is
It's
pretty incredible. So, but again, I'm trying to get more involved and share my ideas from my nature perspective, because what I don't want to see happen is this pasture land get over pastured or pushed, beyond that carrying capacity where it starts to fall apart. So
but
this
that's why the
year,
dairy operation is perfect, because they already have the infrastructure in place to limit it.
correct, correct. And that, again, baby steps. We're
Yeah.
making baby steps in the right direction. But this year, what we're going to be doing, this is exciting to me, because one of the main pastures where we run heifers during the summertime is one of the best deer hunting valleys on the farm. And I'm going to be adding a couple more food plots with this cattle or livestock integrated seeding system that I've been using the last couple of years with Promise. I'm tweaking that all the time. But we're going to also implement, because one of my big concerns with the timber stand side of things was the lack of oak regeneration that we're getting due to no fire and poor management. So we're going to start integrating or utilizing patch burn grazing in this pasture. It's like 100 and I think the pasture is 150 acres. So essentially we're going to divide that into thirds. We're going to bird 1/3 every year and rotate through that. The third that's burnt is the most palatable. The one that was burnt the year prior, still very palatable and attractive, but has a little bit more cover aspect to it. And then the one that was burned 2 years prior has the most cover, starting to get more woody regeneration and everything. That's where the wildlife tend to spend most of their time, but they still, benefit in feeding from the most recently burned area. So it gives those animals freedom to move around without fencing, but also diversity with habitat types and cover types and food sources. And it's regenerating the nutrients or recycling the nutrients and regenerating the vegetative growth at a lot better, healthier rate. So I'm definitely excited to start implementing that stuff. And it's a beautiful property. I mean, I've been on a lot of properties the last few years throughout the Midwest, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt, it's one of the most beautiful properties I've ever been on. I might be a little bit biased because I grew up there, but very few. I mean, there are invasives popping up and there's invasives around, but for the most part, there's no woodlots that are overrun with invasives. We don't have the invasive shrub issue, and beautiful, clean waterways. Still a lot of diversity, a lot of native diversity down in these bottoms where they have never been pastured and never been farmed. So I just want to see that maintained. I just want to see it improve, and that was my primary concern. And talking to him was, ensuring that these things are around for all these generations to come, and not just focusing on the farm as far as the income farming aspect of it, but focusing on the nature aspect of it and how do we pull that together and get it to produce so we can ensure that it sticks around.
That's gonna be a good project, man. Good for you.
Yeah, it's going to be busy, but it's good because I've been thinking about it for most of my life. So it's pretty easy now to start implementing these things. It's time to do instead of just think and visualize.
Well, and it finally makes sense because you can. I think I think financially it makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. We should talk more about those polyculture plantings around those edges because I that's a big thing that I think a lot of people miss on diversifying income and at the same time building habitat, that diversity with the habitat that benefits the wildlife, but you still have the cash crop value or potential there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be even just on the edges. I think polyculture, the idea, and really what we're talking about is just including woody crop plantings with whatever type of annual production or perennial production that you're doing. So polyculture is just it's multi-species. Monoculture is the opposite of it. Monoculture we've talked about is planting one species like corn or soybeans. So I got obviously this information from Mark Shepard, author of Restoration Agriculture. He is more heavily into the agroforestry woody crop planting, producing low input and high returns. So woody crop plantings like chestnut, hazelnuts, and apples mimic our region, which is oak savanna. So instead of oaks, we are planting chestnuts and hazelnuts. And then instead of like plums and cherry trees, we would plant apple trees. If you were doing more, you could easily do this is what I wish a lot of the apple orchards around here would do. And then in an oak savanna ecosystem, oak trees being the dominant species, what they're doing is providing the canopy layer and shade, for a more diverse understory of plants. I like seeing the more, where you have solid grasses and bushes growing under the oaks, not the heavy clumps of oaks that are choking out everything underneath them. So they also produce, the nuts for the animals. They're, super productive for wildlife, and they're also a good return for the landowner over a long period of time. And we're talking, what, 40 to 50 years before you'd get timber returns from it.
Probably longer than that for anything substantial. But I mean, what you're talking timber returns if you are planting purely for timber, which chestnuts have a very, very high timber value if you want to look at that. But obviously, the cash crop value from the nut production is going to be substantially
Yeah.
higher.
Well, I was saying more like when would someone expect if they truly ran an oak savanna with oaks, your return is a long ways down the road.
Yeah, for sure. 50 to 100 years is probably more likely, especially in most your typical woodlots where they're crowded, where they're growing at such a slow rate in general.
Yeah. So chestnuts and hazelnuts are, the woody crop that we would choose. I think chestnuts, they're more of the taller tree that's, I think, more similar to oaks. Hazelnuts are more of a taller shrub that kind of, I would say are more of that second story type species. Chestnuts obviously are super beneficial for wildlife and deer, especially, and turkeys and squirrels. Hazelnuts aren't as much of an attractant for deer, but I think provide a really nice bushy coverage that is more, I think specialized for. I'm using them for windbreaks, kind of snow breaks, and then cover. It's that bushy cover that I think a lot of animals appreciate.
Well, and they're delicious. I mean, if
Yeah.
you ever,
Well, and then chestnut and hazelnuts it's a market that hasn't truly been tapped yet. And I think we're entering into a time where it's going to have to be. Hazelnuts have even been talked about before for an option for biofuel. So an alternative energy source. And that's been, tossed around by the military and the government. Take that forever for whatever it's worth.
yeah.
So how I would set these things up, take a blank canvas of a agricultural field that has been monocropped for years and years, let's say. So how we set it up is you take a keyline design. So a keyline design is taking the topography and setting it off by 1% grade. So you want a 1% grade from the start of your field out to the ridges. And you can build terraces to this, or you can just plant the trees and run the operation with this. So you know, if you ever were to work with Mark and how we designed my place, you identify the main key line on the property. And it's very similar to the lines that you see on topography maps. But you set it off to where, say, like on my property, it's kind of a north to south ridge. Okay. So on the north ridge is the high ground. And everything that works to the south is going downhill technically, right? Because, you know, the ridge starts higher, you work out the ridge, it's slowly moving downhill. Okay, so the key line operates at to where it's the north border. It is at a 1% higher elevation than where it ends at the end of the ridge. So what that does in theory is you are moving water out the ridge system. So instead of just losing all the water down into the valleys, and if you were to take your knuckle, like the hand of your knuckle, you have all of these ridges and valleys, right? Well, the water will flow down these valleys. What this can do is you're putting vegetation and terraces or whatever, and you're stopping that flow of water and you're moving it out the ridge. So if you're ever on a ridge system, the worst ground is usually on the top of that ridge, and you run out that ridge spine because that's the least amount of nutrients. The best ground is the low-lying areas that are receiving all the nutrients. What this is hopefully dispersing those nutrients out the ridge and giving your ridge system an opportunity to have those nutrients. It also gives you an opportunity to have water holding ponds in places that you would never expect to have them if you're using terraces. With the trees, you plant them along those alleys, and then once you identify those first key lines, you then make all the key lines below them the same exact feet as long as you can. And ideally, you set it up to where you can still run whatever operation you're running. So a corn farmer, take the width of your corn planter and do two swipes. So I can go up and I can go down that alley. That's the distance that the trees are planted at, and give yourself, 5 or 10 feet difference for them to grow over time. Those tree lines, then all they really need to be is mowed or just swiped along. You can talk more about how to have successful tree crops. There's different theories with it. Mark's theory is to plant more volume and do less work. You can have tree tubes, you can have whatever. You can install tape drip lines in them. There's a million different ways to have these tree operations work. The best thing about this, though, is you're creating an efficient process. You're only taking away about 8 to 10% of the land with your crop, and then you are within 7 to 10 years getting money returned for these crops. Well, we are in
a big thing there, and we can back up and talk about a couple of those other things, but a big thing there is you are maximizing the solar efficiency of that land, right?
Yes.
And that's a big thing. It's like your monocrop agriculture is essentially a 1D or a flat plane.
It's a one-dimensional
flat plane. It's taking up the sun on that one level, where when you add these structures but still have that space in between, and that's that that oak savanna concept there, where every time I mention this, for me, when I first started getting into this, when someone mentioned oak savanna, this is actually back in my college days, biology, someone mentions oak savanna, instantly I think of the African savanna, which is exactly true, right? Like you envision this plainsy type area, but these more sporadic giant trees that grow and provide that shade for those animals, and a whole nother ecosystem. And that's where the oak savanna should really be. And that's where, when you plant these polyculture rows, whether it be alley cropping like you're talking about, if you're setting it up to where you have fields in between these rows, or you're grazing or whatever it might be, now you're maximizing the solar exposure, how much surface area that sun is actually hitting. And especially if you're running those rows for the most part north to south, as much as possible, or just having them spaced out enough, like you said, then you're getting sun most of the time on all sides, or 3 sides of that row, depending on if you're in the northern or southern hemisphere. But no, it's I love it. I mean, that's how we actually, on client properties, when we're doing food plots, we promote that as much as possible, because there's no better way. If you're trying to create a transition food source for your deer to hunt over, the best thing you can do is have a long, narrow, meandering food plot that's surrounded by food and cover. i.e., what we just talked about. So it's the same exact concept. And then even when you get out to those larger, more destination type food plots, lining that sucker with fruit trees and also breaking up bigger plots with these edges of these polycultures. You're talking about wildlife. Most wildlife thrives with edge habitat, especially deer and turkeys and songbirds and all these other things. So creating more edge habitat, but doing it strategically so that it's maximum production. You're not choking out areas of your food plot, but also you're planting species that are going to thrive in your area and have maximum attraction value to them. It's yeah, it's an unbelievable concept. I mean, the results that we've seen over the years from this and how things are developing, and we're just kind of getting started with this. There's only a handful of people that have these well-established systems. And I think the biggest takeaway from this is the fact that once these systems are established, there's no inputs. There's very little management involved with them at the end of the day. I mean, you're going out and you're copicing some of your shrubs from time to time. A lot of shrub species you can mow right off or even burn off or graze down. And your trees, I mean, a chestnut tree will be 1,000 years old. I mean, those things, once they're established, if they're healthy and it's a healthy system where again, you're removing the mechanical and chemical disturbances and you're allowing more of a natural disturbance and natural nutrient cycling around them, those trees are going to live forever. And that's, we've talked about this before too, is creating these legacy properties. Man, you want to build a property for your family, for hunting, for income. I mean, you just choose what level you want to get involved with this stuff, and you can make it happen. I mean, it's very, very doable. I will say, some of these things are they're easier said than done. It's not hard to do them. It's just the amount of work that's actually involved to get them established. I think a lot of people overlook that. I mean, myself included. It's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go plant 50 trees out here. It should be, a couple hours or an afternoon. Well, then you have days into it. And the biggest thing with all that stuff, trees, shrubs, anything, if you're going to plant that, have a good plan and make sure that you're protecting those things, because deer love regeneration of all types. I mean, they're probably your biggest enemy when it comes to trees, but obviously if you have a hunting property, you're planting them for those deer in the long run. Rabbits, we actually, when we went to that massage place this morning, we pulled up and the first thing I noticed was this, I don't even know what kind of tree it was, some exotic tree planted in the front yard, but there must have been a rabbit population around because the bottom 14 inches of that tree was completely girdled. All the cambium layer, the whole outer bark was chewed off completely. So that tree is definitely going to die. So protect your investment. I mean, Taylor and I were talking earlier before we hit record about how we protect our trees. I'll let Taylor talk a little bit here and he can explain the things that he's done and maybe some of the things he's learned through trial and error and whatnot. I mean, at this point, you've had some success and you've had some failures. I mean, that's part of trying new things, right?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, trees are finicky. Like you're gonna have some die. I don't think there's anything that you can do about it. So I planted, I think we were over 300 trees the first year we were here, and they were mixture of chestnut, hazelnut, and apple trees. Apple trees seem to have done the best so far. They're all kind of blowing up out of the tubes and seem to, as long as, I guess the biggest issue with them has been they got bigger so much faster, and the tubes are kind of like a sail and they will get blown over in the wind at times. So you'll have a beautiful apple tree that's almost 10 feet tall already, and then the tube won't hold up. So tubes are, frustrating, but I think without them, you're looking at probably under a 10% success rate on the trees. Mark has a theory where you plant more volume. So you ignore the fact that you are the spacing requirement. So if you're planting with tubes, whatever it is, 30 feet for chestnuts and apples or something like that, he plants them at about, I think, like 4 or 5 feet. And then as the ones who survive over time, he then goes out and takes out the ones that don't look as nice or are out competing the ones that are doing better.
So he doesn't tube any of his trees?
I think they're getting into tubing now, but his farm was established without tubing anything.
That's interesting because there's no
Yeah.
way. I mean, again, it's every situation is going to be different for sure. And, his farm was a unique situation where he bought, a big farm that was all abused tillable land and converted it over. So it's going to be obviously different if you're planting those trees along an edge where there's already an established wildlife population. But what he did was he basically created habitat for wildlife to actually move in and thrive on top
But
of
he
his
would plant,
ag production.
yeah, like he would plant things. So like he explained to me one time, like he would plant poplars along with chestnuts because the poplars are going to shoot up and take over and kind of be the predominant. Um, and he said that would be the dominant thing that deer are going to graze on, and it actually saved a lot of his chestnuts.
Yeah, no, that
You
makes
just go
makes
through and you
sense.
take out the poplars over time. But there is, I mean, there's tons of dead trees. But he was also a nursery, so he was hyper focused on breeding, the best tree that would survive. Number one, the grazing pressure of deer and wildlife, and then also the climate.
No, it
I
all
think
makes good sense for sure.
if I were to do it again, I think when you first buy the property, you should try to plant a ton of trees because use to your advantage the herbicide, whatever glyphosate that has been sprayed on it prior. So if you're taking over a monocrop field, that actually is a great residue to plant trees into. What I would do though is I would unroll hay in the alleys that I want to plant it. So along the same exact ground that you're planting the trees, unroll that hay, and it's actually a pretty nice width as far as what that would look like for the trees. And then I would spear down through the hay and through the soil to plant the trees. If you have a tree planting, pull behind trailer or whatever those things are, you might not be able to do it as easily. But I think it's important to get that mat cover. So you could theoretically just unroll the hay after the planting and then use pitchforks to, spread it out all around those trees. And I would probably plant the double the width requirements. I'd probably plant like every 15 feet, and I'd still use tubes. And then I would use so it's more of a hybrid model of what he's doing. And instead of obviously crop being like what you can do, I graze those alleys and plant, food plots. But he's set up systems in monoculture type settings, and really those trees and shrubs, they handle glyphosate well. So if someone is a no-till crop farmer that is spraying, and that actually does help the weed competition. So what you see is the act in between the alleys is what actually is managing the trees. Because the trees, if you just go plant a bunch of trees in CRP, you should run a mower alongside those a couple times in the first few years to
Yeah.
help with weed suppression. But whether you are grazing animals amongst them, and if you're grazing animals with those tubes are they don't kill your electric fence, and as long as you have electric fence in front of the tubes, they really don't. The cattle won't mess with them. I have pretty good luck with it.
Do you ever put your electric fence insulators right on a T-post connected to the tube? Have you ever done that?
So if I were, yeah, actually we have them. I use those wood posts, those wood stakes when I planted all those trees. That was a mistake. Those were
The
5-foot stakes.
bamboo or
No,
like
no, they just were like $2 wood stakes.
okay.
And I got them from the county extension. So I'd bought trees from like 4 or 5 different places, but our county does tree sales and they had the cheapest tubes available. So I bought all of my tubes from them with the stakes. But the stakes were only 5-footers. Mark said you need to get 6-footers because of what happened to me. Though they can't withstand the wind. So 5-foot stakes pounded into the ground are not tall enough where those tubes bend over them. So if you have taller stake, it works a lot better. But yeah, I put insulators right on it. If I were to do it again, I would just use T-posts, probably like almost every other, or find a different type of fencing type structure. I think what I'm going to try this year though is actually running the poly through the tubes, because the tubes don't do anything to it, and the tubes have all those. I don't know if your tubes have these little holes in them, but
Yeah.
it's actually like the perfect size. You can just run poly wire right through them, and they could be your your insulator.
Yeah, the only issue with that is removing the tubes to clear out the leaf litter within them might be kind of a pain. But really, all you have to
Well,
do is pull the
that
tube
would
up
be
a
more of
couple
a
inches.
that'd be the rotational grazing. So
Yeah,
you would reel those you would reel those wires in.
reel it back
If you're
through.
doing permanent wire along them, then you should just have the T-post set up and um, use the posts that you have on the trees.
Yeah, I mean, I've used all sorts of things. I mean, what I generally tell my clients, because it just varies, and we can ship the tree tubes. The tree tubes that we use are actually split tree tubes, so they come kind of rolled up. You can pack a ton of them in a box, and then they are held together by reusable zip ties. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Again, they ship nicely, but at the end of the day, when that tree grows, we leave those tree tubes on the trees until it outgrows the tube, and that split tube will just kind of open up slowly in the back, and that protects that tree for 10 years from cattle rubbing on it, deer trying to rub on it. I mean, there's nothing worse than planting a tree for deer and having it hit a productive state and then having a buck come in and girdle it and rub it all up. I mean, it's like that double-edged sword. We're like, oh, this is awesome to see a buck rub on this 6-inch diameter tree, but now that tree's dead.
Yeah, it's crazy that they don't mess with the tubes.
Yeah,
Because cattle will run them over. Like
cattle
if
run them
they're in a
over. I mean, I've got clients throughout the Midwest, and we're dealing with bears. Bears are a real problem with tree tubes. They get curious, they climb up on top and try and look inside, and if you don't have them secured, that are problems. So those, what I've been doing with them, and I think I'm going to change up my strategy a little bit with them. So typically, what I do with the tree tubes is I don't use spray around the trees, and most of my clients don't want to deal with rolling out bales and stuff like that. So, first and foremost, we have to start with what the initial soil conditions are. If it's already pretty good soil, then we don't have to worry about a lot. But if it's poor soil, then sometimes we're doing a couple years of cover cropping food plots in that area to try and build up that soil, at least increase the soil biology before we do anything, which is what you're accomplishing by rolling that hay out, right? You're activating that soil biology quite a bit and also reducing the weed competition or suppressing it. But what we do is we actually run these, what we call tree survival kits, where it's a tree tube, again, that split tube, and then a 3 by 3 foot plastic weed mat, and then staples to hold it in, landscaping staples. And then we throw a slow release fertilizer pack in the ground about 8 or 10 inches from that tree itself. And then I'm assuming you're planting the same thing, but we use exclusively like 1 to 2 year old seedlings when we plant these trees. And a main reason for that is those seedlings by nature are going to be a lot more vigorous in their growth for the first couple of years than what a 5 or 6 year old potted plant would be. So this is a question I get commonly from
and the
clients.
price is
And the
insane.
price, yeah, and the overall time involved with planting them is
Yes.
dramatically different. But for me, there's a huge benefit, and I've seen this on my own properties many times over, where like this year is a good example. Like I've got a couple projects going on by my house. I'm going to plant mostly these seedlings that I get through a nursery I have a partnership with, but they're all full size trees, which is great. I like that idea on hunting properties. Get as big a tree as you possibly can. But like one of the projects that I'm working on this year is I'm actually ripping out all this invasive brush under a power line along one side of my property, and I'm going to plant a row of fruit trees there because it gets the best sun exposure on my property, because most of my property is wooded. But I'm going to go with all dwarf stock trees then. So I'll end up getting these like 4 or 5 year old bare root trees and put them in the ground. Well, what I've seen, bare root or even potted trees that are 4 or 5 years old, and I guarantee everyone else out there sees the same thing, is the first few years that tree doesn't do a whole lot. What's that old saying with perennial plants? Sleep, creep, grow, or sleep, creep, leap, or something like that. The first year they're not doing much. The second year you see a little bit, and then the third or fourth year they start to really take off. But what I've seen in these side by side comparisons using these tree survival kits compared to a potted plant that's already 5 years old, usually by year 3, that what started out as a 20-inch or 18-inch seedling is up and out of that tube, and it's already caught up to that 5-year-old tree, because those seedlings are a lot more vigorous. And here's the big kicker here, and this is really important for anyone who's thinking about planting a lot of trees on their property and trying to cover the logistical side of watering them or maintaining them, we rarely ever water trees. I don't actually, I water them by my house when it's convenient because I have a hose out doing something else, but I never water them on the hunting property. Those vigorous young seedlings adapt to the soil conditions at a lot faster rate. So they haven't acclimated to what's in that potted bucket that tree was grown in. So they spread out their root system faster. They adapt to that soil condition a lot faster. And then the use of that plastic weed mat, it does two things where it's suppressing all the weed competition around that tree. And at the same time, it forces that tree to spread its root system out faster to seek the nutrients, or not the nutrients, excuse me, the moisture that's falling around that mat. Any water that flows underneath it or is pulled into the soil around it gets trapped under that plastic mat, but it's not permeable. So water on top gets shed off to the sides, and those trees grow the root system wider a lot faster. So they become a more stable tree and just expand their root system at a much faster rate. And then when they hit those slow release fertilizer packs, or that fertilizer is kind of distributed into the soil in that certain area, then they get this secondary shoot, or this growth spurt, where that's when you usually see them that year 2, year 3, where all of a sudden they're way out of the tube and they're super healthy. So that's the system that we run. With the bear issue or cattle, what I had been doing was I'd put 2 T-posts in the ground on each side of that tree tube and run wire around the whole thing so that it could move a little bit, but it couldn't move far. But I think this
That's
year
expensive.
it adds up. It adds up for sure. But I think this year what I'm going to do, especially now that my dad's on board for some of these plantings along the edges or within some of these cattle pastures to build back edges, I think I'm just going to go ahead and invest the money into putting a cage around them, like probably a 3-foot diameter cage with a T-post and anchor it down. And I'm doing this with my clients now. I've got enough clients built up that I actually started kind of a buyback program with them for stuff like that, where, we're spending all this money. Well, they're spending this money on these cages and this protective tubing. And at some point, they're not going to need that anymore. And those tubes, I haven't seen one fall apart yet. I've had some out in the field for 5, 6, 7 years already, and haven't seen any issues with degradation with those plastic tubes. So basically, all my clients, especially with the cages, it's like when you're done with that cage and that tree's established, you don't need it, I'll buy it back from you and I'll just reuse it on another property. So we're not contributing to the waste problem in this country at the end of the day, right? So that's kind of the system that we use, but it's been successful. I mean, we're seeing, and this is a lot of these numbers are coming from the nursery, because I did what I always do, where I don't trust anything and do more digging, more research, try and reinvent the wheel, at least prove to myself what's right or wrong. And the survival rate using those tree survival kits and protective tubing is running right about 92% with our seedlings, so, and our shrubs. And the shrubs we put in a tube that's half the height of a tree tube. So it's a 30-inch tube for the shrubs and a 60-inch tube for the trees. And then we use the same system on the ground for both of them. And the stakes, I've used all sorts of stakes to hold those tubes up. I've had the same issues as you, where the wind blows them over. Never, ever consider using a bamboo stake. It is a waste of your time and money, and that tree will absolutely have problems because it's going to break off at some point. I've used other wood stakes. I've used PVC pipes. I've used a lot of these like aluminum, or excuse me, steel tube, like garden stakes that are coated with plastic on the outside. Those seem to work out pretty well for the most part. Those are 6-foot stakes. The issue with those is if it's rocky soil and you're trying to drive them into the ground, you hit a rock, they don't hold up well. And then, at the same time, a cow, cattle, bear, whatever it might be, that puts some pressure on there can kink those over pretty easily. So, T-posts work well. Steel, like rebar, works fairly well. I mean, at the end of the day, usually what I tell my clients is, if you know anyone with a scrap pile, go rummage through there and see if you can find, 1-inch conduit or any pipe first, and just start cutting sections out of that. And then from there, we start purchasing the pipes or the stakes. But, the cost of the trees themselves are cheap. It's just the protective tubing is double the cost of the tree, but you have to protect them.
Yeah. I'm going more into fiberglass rods this year. So I'm setting up a couple different grazing farms, and we're gonna go pretty much all fiberglass rods instead of T-posts. A little bit cheaper option. You can get them in bulk, and they don't need insulators.
Can you get 6-footers?
Yeah.
Are you planting trees on those farms?
No, not yet. Well, one farm I don't have to plant trees on
They already
because
have
it's
them planted.
Mark's.
Oh, oh, that's convenient.
So he's taking care of that. He's taking care of that for me.
Yeah, no, that's
Um,
good. That's cool.
but the other one, yeah, I'm hoping there will be. It's a brand new ag field, so it's start to finish. But I think fiberglass rods seem to be the better option when you're doing a lot of these things. And if I were to do like what you were saying, because for a grazing operation, it's nice because you kind of already need the fencing infrastructure up, and you're just adding one poly wire if you want it permanent, or you're moving, backside to front side with them as they move. What I would do though is I would go every other. I'd go T-post or fiberglass 1-inch fiberglass rod, and then on the other side of that, I would go a 3/8 inch fiberglass rod and hold an insulator on it, because those 3/8 fiberglass rods are dirt cheap.
Yeah.
And they're not doing anything to hold up the tube, but then it has that like what you were describing, where you have the fencing on both sides.
Yeah, protects the tube in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting. I mean, grazing cattle through there is a little bit different. I mean, they rub on everything they can, but running them through there at the frequency or the duration that you are versus the cattle on our farm, where they basically have free access to that pasture, the entire summer. They literally just get bored, I think, and they
Well,
start
that's
rubbing
can't
and curious and
rule number
stuff.
one. Rule number one. You gotta move them.
Yeah.
If they're bored, they do dumb stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
and they get bored pretty quickly.
so do humans.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, that's the rotational grazing system with this works brilliantly because of that stuff. Because it's true. Cattle, if they get bored, like, go look at right now, like my wood posts and the things that they have access to in the winter around the pen that they get to come into every day or most days. I mean, they're all rubbed up. They're bent. Some things are, if they get access to a T-post out in the open, oh my gosh, it's their favorite thing in the world, and it's all rubbed and bent, and yeah. So but they don't, most of the year they don't deserve access to that stuff.
yeah. No, it's fun. I mean, here's the thing that I think is cool with all this stuff. Obviously the long-term soil health benefits, and that directly equates to long-term human health benefits, and obviously animal health and all the stuff in between. But I think it's just, there's a lot of fun involved with trying these things, whether it's trying these different cover crop blends or it's trying different tree species and ways to protect them and playing around with them. It's fun to be engaged in these things and get that feedback. And when it's all done, it's never really all done, but when it gets to the point where it's producing, whether it's, selling a side of beef to someone in the local community, or seeing those trees mature to a level where they're producing that mass for humans and or animals, like, it's so rewarding. It's just incredibly rewarding. And that's what, a lot of these projects now, to me, especially on the farm that I grew up on and have invested a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over the years, uh, being involved in these projects with my own children at this point, and again, building these legacy properties, that's something that I know, again, despite the relationships I have, or the relationship I have with my father and even the rest of my extended family that hunt the farm, we all want the same thing, in the fact that we want that land to be in the family and be of value to the family and hold the family together forever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, at the end of the day, that's what everyone needs to think about, is that future. And there's so many times throughout my normal day where, I look at a business. I've got a lot of friends in a lot of different types of business. And, you just look at what that business is doing. Is it a long-term or short-term thing? The decisions they make short-term to drive sales or make more money versus long-term. And, that's the thing, is most farmers, you have to appreciate the fact that they're not in it really for the money. the money is just that resource that keeps things moving along and provides stability, but they're not in there for the money. They're in there for the love of the land, the love of the animals, the love of their family, and ensuring the future of that land and the animals and everything that comes with it. So, I mean, I think that's probably a good way to wrap up our Valentine's Day episode, is talking about the love of the land. And with that, I guess your weekly tip, right? The whole tip to improve your life, improve your community, and improve the environment around you. Uh, you know, this one is really about your life in general. It's Valentine's Day. Again, by the time you listen to this, it's going to be a couple days post Valentine's Day. So hopefully you don't make any bad decisions. But the tip of the week this week is, if you get your wife pregnant tonight or the next few days, or for the ladies listening to this, if you get pregnant during this time and you're a hunter, kiss the
First
rut
week of
goodbye.
November.
Kiss it goodbye. The rut is no longer an option for you to be hunting. So don't get too ruddy tonight. I mean, get as ruddy as you want, but be aware. Situational awareness is a big deal throughout every aspect of your life. So just be aware of what's going down, or where it's going, I should say. That's my tip.
Seriously, it's real. Valentine's Day and the rut correlate exactly. And if
Yeah.
you're not smart on Valentine's Day, you will not be in the tree November 3rd.
Yeah. Well, that's only, that concept is only giving up 1 year, but this was
And
actually a pretty,
birthday's forever.
yes, this was a pretty heavy debate actually between me and my wife when we started uh the path of producing small human beings. I was trying to be very strategic about having kids around hunting seasons, and we were successful with that. I mean, we had to delay certain you know cycles to get around the
Yep.
hunting seasons. But I mean, for me, it was very important because I'm a very passionate outdoorsman and hunter, and obviously a lot of my livelihood comes from the credentials that I obtained through my success of hunting. So I can't just throw away seasons. And if I have control over it, then I'm going to plan around it, right? That's I'm a planner by trade. But I don't want to ever miss my children's birthdays, right? They're the most important part of my life, my family. And if I have control and I can avoid having children born during any time throughout the hunting season in the fall, and also the hunting season during the spring, because I like to turkey hunt, and I like to bear hunt and stuff like that. I was willing to give that up. That was lower on the priority list, but fall was top priority. But yeah, if you have control over it, and then this kind of holds
Which you
true with
do,
anything.
you do,
You
you
do.
do.
You do.
You have control.
You absolutely have control. There's a lot of options, right? So that's your
Yeah.
tip.
I mean,
Don't be a dummy. I'm just gonna leave it at that. I don't need to go full PG-13 there.
that's funny. All right. My tip from the land world is just remember, if you are looking to buy, like, my opinion with land is it's a great parallel to a Roth IRA or a retirement account. So I love the fact that if you can buy land with cash, that's the greatest thing in the world, because everything we talked about today, that's a true return. And I'm not saying those returns with trees and everything that we do is going to pay for a loan, but if you look at land similar to a savings account, or a retirement account, then those things are actually awesome. And those are and they make a lot of sense. Land should be treated as a generational wealth tool, generational thing that you pass on to the next group. But if you are going to lend, and I was there, I bought our farm still with a loan, and to go through that and try to pay for it with the land is a difficult task. I'm not saying that that's easy, or is it it's not necessarily like owning apartments or just single family homes. But if you do need to get a loan, remember, it is also not treated the same as your conventional 30-year fixed loan. So your interest rates are going to be a little bit higher. You're looking at 20-year amortization schedules, and you're locked in for usually about 5 years. And you usually need to bring about 20% down minimum. But remember, 20% down on a real estate purchase is not only cash. If you own real estate and you have equity in that real estate, that can be leveraged the same way as cash. So loan to value ratio, if you own a piece of real estate and you have, say, 40% loan to value, that means you can borrow up to 80%. Essentially just means that you can't have anything levered, or, the bank won't accept anything. They're not going to take something that you only own 10% equity in, right? So if you own a single family home and you guys did a good job, it appreciated over the last few years like it probably has, you could go get a loan for land, and maybe you don't have much of cash you want to put down on it. You could lever your existing home and the equity you have in it, and then put that into a loan to purchase land.
That's exactly what we just did. Actually, we leveraged our equity in our house, the property that we live on, and we actually bought the neighboring property. So there's no better investment right now than land, without a shadow of a doubt. If you are sitting on some cash, that cash is losing value daily in this economy. You should be sticking it into land. Here's a question for you. I've got a couple clients actually that work in the banking industry. One specific client, they're trying, or they have opened up a whole funding line specifically for recreational properties. What I was trying to entertain, or get him to entertain, is the idea of a land improvement type loan. You can get a home improvement loan where you can, basically invest money into your house, or take out a loan to invest money into your house, because that's, inevitably going to increase the value of your house. Why doesn't anyone have land improvement loans? And maybe they do, but this bank didn't. And he thought it was an interesting idea. I'd like to see more of it, because, everything that we talk about, it's like, okay, what's all these upfront costs? Well, if you can stick, and that's the problem, or one of these obstacles, you just go out and you spend all your cash as a down payment on this property, and you invest in this property, you don't really have another $10,000 or $20,000 to get in there and start, whether it's some moderate excavating, if you're, terracing key line plans, or, planting trees, you're talking $5,000-$10,000 if you want to put 300 or 400 trees and shrubs and protective tubing across your property, stuff like that. I think that the public in general should make more push for that, because that's, it's a slow return, but it's absolutely improving the value of that land without a shadow of a doubt.
So that's a good question. I will say that does exist. It's called commercial lending. Most land deals operate under commercial lending. That's where the 20-year amortization schedules are. That's where a lot of these rules are from. That's where I see most of the lending taking place. That, or Compeer ag financing. Compeer is like the best company I've seen that does ag financing, where you can actually get fixed rates as well, and a little bit lower interest rates. But with commercial, all you do is, say you are levering your other property, and say you buy the property for $300,000, but you need about $40,000 of improvements on it. So then you go back to commercial lender and say, I'm actually getting a loan for $340,000. So then your down payment is only 20% of that $340,000, and that's your value add. The problem with that right now is, the problem with that right now is the way appraisals are going. Okay, like we talked about, loan to value 80 to 20, right? Or 85 or 75 to 25 on some commercial deals. The appraisals are not necessarily reflecting the actual price per acre on deals that they should be, because they're behind. They're always behind, and because of our skyrocketing rate,
inflation
with price per acre, appraisals are lacking. So sometimes these appraisals are coming back where people are having to bring even more cash to make up the difference with the loan to value ratio. But commercial loans allow you to do that. You just explain what you want to do. Ideally, the property has the value in it to just easily, do that with the equity. But there's always ways to do these things. So like, you get that loan, and the commercial banker's nervous. We'll just say, we'll refund. Well, we'll get it reappraised in a year after all my improvements are done, and make sure those improvements are things that actually translate back to the value. Putting a well in, putting a driveway in, putting a home site in, maybe the terraces and tree plantings might be something different. I might go to an ag type like lender for that, because that most likely wouldn't translate. Like, an appraisal's not even going to know what that is. But pulling electricity off the all of a sudden pulling utilities onto the vacant land property where you have a well, electricity, and a building site, that translates super well. That's easy to have. And then I would go through commercial for that. But the
Good.
real issue, and you can explain this to me, like right now, a bank is willing to give you a 30-year fixed rate in conventional financing for a single family home that is an extremely, it's still a good interest rate, 4.5%, 5%, I think they're at, maybe 5.5. Land, you're looking at like 7 with commercial loans. But how can a single family home right now, where they're going to let you leverage everything, where their loan to value is only 97-3, so you only got to bring 3% down in some of these loans. How is that less risky than someone buying land? And you're going to give us a worse interest rate and less years to pay it back. That's bullshit. Land is the best investment over the last 50 years. Single family homes constantly go up and down, especially in right now, right to like today's market. You're asking me right now, do you feel comfortable with buying single family homes priced as they are right now? I don't know, probably not. I think there's some possible friction there. I think it's way more of a possibility that those loans go bad over the next 10 years than land.
Yeah.
Like, where's land gonna go? It's bullshit.
No, I agree. It's good info, something for everyone to think about, especially if you're entertaining the idea of buying land. But that brings up a good point too. It's like looking at that stuff, you really want to weigh out those options. Is it worth buying a single family home or investing in land and improving that land, building a house on that land at some point?
The actual response to that is it's best to buy a single family home with land on it. Just
Yeah.
make sure the land. So here's the rule with that: you can get conventional financing, but the land can't be worth more than the house. Okay. If the land is worth more than the house, go to Compeer. Compeer is the best thing. Compeer doesn't play by the rules of normal banks. They're an egg, and everything they do is in-house, so they have a lot more flexibility. I'm not saying they're, slam dunk. If you're a mess financially, you just need to get your stuff figured out, and you need to get ready to buy. But if you have real assets and you're not a mess, there's someone that can give you, some good options. Just explore them. You should always explore different options, because say you buy a house and maybe the land is worth way more. Well, then just lock in your 30-year fixed conventional loan with the percentage of the land that equals the house, and then go get the rest of the land on a different loan.
No, that's good. That's good. That's all good information. Hopefully someone out there is listening to this that is thinking about these things, and that helps them out. And with that, if you are listening to this and you got some value, whether it be entertainment value or some valuable information out of it, please do us a favor and share the podcast, share the YouTube video, whatever it might be. Just share it, spread the word, kind of that value exchange that we're hoping to provide here. Anything else you want to throw in there?
No, I think that's good. Look forward to next week.
So next week, just a little bit of a preview. I've been getting some other questions, direct messaging from a few podcast listeners. I had a pretty good conversation with a friend and client of mine the other day on this topic about giant miscanthus grass. If you're in the whitetail world and you follow any of the other definitely bigger name consultants than me, you've probably heard of giant miscanthus grass being used for screening and structure and bedding areas. And for those of you who are not familiar, the giant miscanthus grass is a exotic grass, arguably an invasive grass. But it's, I deal with these questions all the time. Rather than me sit here and talk about it, even though I do have a biology background and my focus is on sustainable native ecosystems, I'm actually going to bring on a botanist next week. So next week we will have our first ever guest on this podcast. It'll be episode 5. This is episode 4. So episode 5, we'll have a botanist on here, and we're going to pick his brain on what he thinks of these invasives or exotic plants being utilized to create so-called habitat in some of these whitetail properties. That being said, if any of you out there listening to this have questions that you'd like us to ask or topics that you'd like us to bring up for this certified practicing botanist, someone who deals with plant species for a living and is well educated in plant species and how they fit into our native ecosystems, please shoot us a message or drop a comment in this week's video, and we will make sure that we address those questions or concerns next week. Otherwise, until then, again, my name is Thomas. My business is the Untamed Ambition. There'll be a link to that in the description of this podcast if you want to reach out and connect or have any questions about anything that we talked about today. Right now is a perfect time of the year to be thinking about planting trees. Obviously, most of the country still has, well, the northern half of the country where we are anyway, still has frozen ground or not great conditions for planting trees, but now is the best time to order trees and shrubs and at least be thinking about those things. I know I personally am out on client properties right now and my own property, peeling back the edges, clearing out the low value trees and shrubs or the invasives to make room for reintroduction of native shrubs and these mass producing high value trees. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to shoot me a message. Taylor, do you have anything that you want to talk about?
Yeah. I make a living being a realtor. If you want to help, if you want help buying or selling land and farms, you can go ahead on this podcast description. There should be a link tree type link with all my different links. Go to there, go to my Facebook, go to my Instagram and find me there. Ask me questions. If you are not a Wisconsin resident, do not worry. I do real estate consulting, and then I'll actually vet and find a local realtor that can finalize the transaction for you. So if you have questions about buying land, regenerative agriculture, reach out and just interact with this page, interact with this podcast, share it to your friends, and let's keep it going.
All right. With that, enjoy your Valentine's Day. But remember,
be smart.
Be smart. All right. Take care.
See you, man.